Hey, Matt.
Yes, Ryan.
It's Black Country out there.
Is it really?
Indeed. And you know what else?
What?
You should listen to this.
You should listen to this. Welcome back, everybody. It is another episode of Hey, Listen to This. I'm Matt Durzik.
And I'm the one, the only, except no substitutes, Ryan James Kearns.
Please don't Google him to disprove him, please. He does. He hates that. He hates that.
It takes a huge blow to my ego.
Yeah. So tonight we're going to be talking about an album that you suggested, Ryan. And before we even get into what the album is, I'm going to ask you right up front, how did you find these guys?
Internet.
Oh, okay. Well, that's simple enough story, I guess.
But no, to elaborate on that, so the artist that we're going to be talking about tonight, it's the post-rock and art rock group called Black Country New Road. And the way that I actually found them at is, I do believe it was either Pitchfork or Brooklyn Vegan, where they were hyping up this specific album that we're talking about, which is For the First Time. And I was just like, I like art rock, and I like post-rock. Let me check it out, because they're like, yeah, there's a lot of hype behind this band.
Right. And whenever you have those kind of accolades, you're just like, you know what? Yeah, let's take a listen to this. Now, I do not read such sources. Again, as we talked about several episodes ago in our sort of getting to know you episode, my promenade towards new music, and I know that's not the right word, but we're going to go with it, hasn't been as high over the last several years. I haven't really been super oh, I need to listen to new music. Every once in a while I'll be like, I'm kind of tired of listening to the same old crap, but most of the time I'm just like, yeah, let's go with the classics. But this right here, definitely different.
Yeah. And just to counteract your statement there, I'm the exact opposite, my dude. I listen to so much new music that even, sometimes I have to go back to, the classics and stuff that I liked before that. So, taking the opportunity to revisit an album, let me even, expand upon that. An art piece like this was... I'm incredibly grateful for the opportunity, and it's amazing, how far I personally come in my discovering new music, abilities, in that before I used to rely on Mr. Anthony Fantano to tell me, hey, this is a new artist that you need to listen to the point that I'm actually listening to music before Fantano, and I'm like, oh, hey, he dropped a review on this album, I liked it, I wonder what he said.
That's impressive. That is impressive. But this album came out of left field for me. Because anytime I hear a band, first of all, anytime a band has a weird name to their band or a weird name to their album, I tend to think that things are going to get a little on the weird side. I remember last year we talked about, we didn't talk about last year because we didn't have a show last year, but in our personal lives, we talked about, and you introduced to me, Dragon New War Mountain, I Believe in You by Big Thief, which has since become one of my favorite albums ever, for various reasons. This one, Black Country New Road, I'm thinking that's an interesting name for a band, probably very hipster-ish and everything. And for one of the rare times when it comes to new music, I was absolutely right, because this band, you talk about this being an art piece, this is probably one of the artsiest records I think I've ever heard.
Yeah, and to be perfectly honest with you, man, and you probably even kind of, picked up on this whenever we were formulating the ideas for, hey, what should we do for our podcast? And one of the very first records that I recommended for you to listen to was the very next album on the discography of Black Country New Road, which is Ants from Up There. And, like, it's the beauty about, like, this project that we started together, man. Like, I can share with you, hey, this is an artist that I'm really excited about, and you could do the same thing, like, hey, let's go back to this time, or hey, this is an artist that I know that you're not exactly 100%, into, but I'm really into it, let's talk about it.
I agree, and so let's talk about it. One thing that got me right away was that there is 6 songs on this album. Would you call it an album or an EP?
I would call it an album. I think it's over 45 minutes, so I would consider it an album. But I mean, I actually don't know what the distinction between an EP and an LP. In my head, it's an album.
Yeah, it definitely plays like an album. It plays like a whole piece. I mean, it's longer than Sgt. Pepper. Everyone says Sgt. Pepper's an album. Let's go with that. So, this album starts with the song, I guess it's just called Instrumental, right?
Yeah, that's exactly what it's called.
And my initial thoughts, and they're still my same thoughts, is I wish at some point over the next 10, 20, maybe 30 years that there is a marching band out there that is going to have the gall and the stones to be like, you've never heard of this band, well, we're going to play this song anyway. Because that's kind of the vibes I get from this song. It's very much a marching band type of piece, honestly. And I have no idea if you have those same vibes, but the vibes we're thinking, I could definitely see, the Golden Tornadoes marching band using this as an opener for their set.
Oh my goodness, that would be absolutely amazing, my dude. So, the group actually, this was the first piece that they wrote together, and this was basically, hey, let's show the world what we can do in terms of, like, composition style, and, like, let's show them our chops. So, the song starts with a very nice drum and bass groove in the beginning, and it's so freaking tight. That pocket is so amazing, man. Mm-hmm. And then from there, I don't know what the proper analogy is. I want to say, like, my brain initially went to, like, the song is like a cake, where, like, there's layers on layers on layers. But then, like, each layer is distinctly different, but it almost seems like insulting to call this, like, a 7-layer dip.
I mean, depending on what your opinion of 7-layer dip is, I guess, would be the route to go. You just triggered something in me now that I think about it. You talk about the layers and how they sort of come in at different times. It's not a direct comparison because the ebb and flow is a lot longer and a lot more agiliac. I don't even know if I pronounced that right. But very soft and smooth and sort of effervescent in its sense. And that's the leading track off of Kraftwerk's Trans-Europe Express called Europe Endless. I don't know if you ever heard that song.
A negative, man.
Okay. It's very much the same. It just has these layers that kind of build and build. Now, it's mostly just synth. And it's a very nice song for being, 9, almost 10 minutes long. But this has a bit more of a sharpness to it, has a bit more of a intensity to it, a ferocity to it. This instrumental called Instrumental. And I like it. I do like it. It's a nice album starter. The only slight criticism I have of it, and this is completely hindsight, is that it does nothing to indicate where this album is going, except for maybe introduce the fact that, hey, we have horns in this band and we have a groove in this band, which, now that I think about it, is very much part of what this album's all about, or at least a good fraction of it. But at the same time, as far as mood or sort of the ambiance, it doesn't really prepare the listener for what's coming next.
I could see that as a fair criticism, even though, like, this does play into, like, my enjoyment of the album. Like, yes, there's 6 separate songs, but this is one specific, like a certain kind of album that mentally I don't break into, like, hey, this is, like, instrumental, and this next song is Athens, France, and this next song is Science Fair. Like, I just consider, like, this whole album is, like, one gigantic piece of music.
I understand that. And to be honest with you, I will agree with you that it's probably the best way, without a doubt, the best way to appreciate this album for what it is. So, yeah, I'll agree to the fact that that's the best way. I mean, individual, because the thing is, after my couple of repeated listens to it over this past week, I did listen to a couple of the songs on shuffle as part of my my flash drive, which I actually have right here because I'm going to change some songs tonight. And individually, they don't come off as strong. At least one of them does, and we'll explain a little later. But like in the two times I've heard this, I'm thinking, you're right. This is not just a collection of songs. This is an album. This is a story. This is a presentation. So, and as far as presentations go, I mean, if you want to talk about like musicals always start with a great instrumental or an overture, if you will. And I think this song does a good job of that, at least. So again, when I say it doesn't prepare them for what's coming next, that's not a knock on this song. That's not I can't appreciate that. No, it's just, if you hear this song in of itself and you expect the album to be just like this, it's not.
Yeah. So just rounding out a couple points about like the opening track, and then we can move into the next song, Athens, France. So like we talk about how like this is a layer upon layer song. Like this song is essentially a round where like every single time like a new instrument comes in, like the previous instruments just keep playing the same part. They're not playing off the same motif per se, so it's not a traditional round, but that's the same kind of like compositional mindset behind it. And like another excellent aspect of this song specifically that I love is the sax solo. Like, holy cow, dude! Like, I love that solo towards the end.
Yeah. I mean that's it, we kind of, well, I at least kind of glossed over that fact, but yeah, everyone who plays an instrument on the song does a really good job of it. So yeah, you get no qualms from me on that. The solo's great, the riffs are great, and that's going to come into play later on. So yeah, very good start to the album.
So let's talk about Athens, France.
Now, this is again where I started to realize that this is not maybe what I was expecting from the instrumental, because this starts to go, and I think more towards the final track we get elements of this, but we also get elements of this on this track too. The entire, I don't think you can really pigeonhole this band into just one category as far as their sound. Because there's elements of so many different things. Like the guitar work on this album, for the most part, sounds like it came from the early 2000s. The horns sound like it came from either the mid 2010s or the mid 1990s. The strings sound like they came from the late 60s or early 70s, and the vocals on these tracks sound like they came from the mid 1980s. So,
yeah.
And all of them are very good. But again, this just creates a very, again, I know we're probably going to use this word about 5,000 more times throughout this podcast, but it's a very artsy move, and it comes across very art rockish.
So, what is your opinion about Isaac Wood's vocal delivery?
I like it. I definitely think, like I said, it has a new wave sense to it. It feels very, I'm trying to think. If you listen to any like song from the new wave era that had that sort of very lush voice that sounds like it should be part of a perfume commercial, then that's kind of what this is. But at the same time, but that's only in the moments where he's at calm. Later on down the line, it doesn't get as calm. Yeah. But in this case, there's a lushness to it and a suave factor to it. And I think it's very good delivery. And because again, the unexpected part about those vocals, not just the fact that it gets more intense later, but I'll betray myself by saying when I hear a song, or most of the song I listen to has a more traditional structure, a traditional hey, listen to this, it's a song by a popular band structure, 4 chords. And even whenever, the point I'm trying to make here is that the songs I mentioned with New Wave that have that sort of talking start, a couple of examples I can think of right off the top of my head, Our House by Madness, and also West End Girls by, I want to say it's the Pet Shop Boys that did it, I want to say. Don't quote me on that. But whenever the talking intro stops, it goes into the vocal melody. There is no vocal melody on this track. He just talks in a very melodic, suave tone, while the rest of the band does their thing. And everybody does their thing very well on this song. It definitely has this portrait of, being overseas. Like, the song's called Athens, France, and it does kind of feel with the strings and the suave vocals that you're trying to be transported into this, not necessarily France itself or Paris, but into sort of that overseas romanticism that a lot of artists, not just in music, but in film, try to go for. And I think that is presented very well on this track.
So, we'll discuss the conclusion of where Isaac Wood is currently with the band after we rate the album and everything like that. But you make an excellent point in that this song is an excellent, way to, talk about, romanticism and, overseas kind of thing. Because what Isaac Wood, the lead singer of this band, does with, their music with this album and the next album, he essentially talks about, broken love and, love that has gone wrong. So Athens, France is the introduction of it in terms of hey, this is where I'm at right now. I'm still a little hurt about what happened, and life is starting to change, and there's nothing I can do to fix what happened. I just gotta go on with the road that is currently meeting me. So, and again, I love the opportunity to talk about this album specifically because I only really observed it from the surface level and not really going a little bit deeper in terms of the lyrics. I just enjoyed the music thoroughly. So, but getting into the lyrics, the very first set of lyrics that comes out of his mouth is, "Now all that I became must die before the form thread. The cursed vultures feed and spread the seeded daily bread." So this is essentially talking about how Isaac is afraid about how his lyrics are going to be dissected, and
oops,
yeah, and even at that, he put a lot of his emotions and his personal experiences into his songwriting. So for him to pour his heart out, he is immediately coming out of the gate with the very first vocal delivery talking about how he's afraid people are going to be able to find out what he's talking about with the pain he's going through. But so first part of the song, you have the traditional I don't want to even call it traditional, but the standard groove that Black Country New Road does, where it's dun 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 dun, it's an earworm that just gets stuck in your head. and you have Isaac Wood just going, riffing on, like, you know, his current state and, like, everything that he's going through. And then you get a change-up where the lyric that leads up into the change-up where the song becomes a little bit more spacey is, I'm very young and working on the glow-up. And, like, from there, like, our previous episode, we talked about Kanye West and Jesus and how he went from, like, and I'm over here, and I'm over here, and I'm over here, and I'm over here. This is how you do that sudden change-up.
Yeah, you don't, you and I think you point to something that is done very well across this album, and on this song is no exception, is the transition between moods and afflictions. It's not always a slow burn or a smooth transition, but the timing on it compared to that of Yeezus is so much better. It tells a tale in a way that, and not that I'm accusing Kanye of not telling a story. He does. I mean, he tells a story in a very weird, twisted way. Not necessarily dark or beautiful that time, but on this particular song, I will say though, lyrically and lyrically presented, this is probably the least of the tracks on the album for me. And the only reason I say that is because it's not that it's bad, but everything else just gets better and better and better as it goes along.
Yeah, especially with the song Sunglasses. But, so, just rounding out, like, the progression of the song, so, from that spacey atmosphere, like, one thing that I made note of that I really liked is the interplay between the strings and the sax. Like, there's, like, as a fellow horn player, and I'm sure, like, as a fellow horn player, such as yourself, like, you can really genuinely appreciate, like, a purposeful use of horns, in that it's not like, oh, hey, I'm gonna be this eclectic and, like, weird artist that's gonna include, like, a trumpet in my, song. Like, this is purposeful and tasteful.
Agreed. That's a very good point. It brings purpose, it brings tone, it brings style. It does more than just exist. Which, you're right. A lot of eclectic artists or indie artists try to go weird and be like, oh, we can do this now, but it's like, what are you really doing? Now, it's funny you mentioned, you ended that with praising the horns and praising the smoothness and the interplay of the tone, because the next song does not do that.
So, before we hop over to the science fair real quick, I want to round out, like, the last little bit of Athens, France. So, the song ends up with just the lyrics talking about, like, just the dealing with a breakup and moving on. Like, there's a lyric that I really like that goes, it's a great wide gulf between intentions and what ground met me. And that's essentially Isaac Wood just, accepting the fact that, like, hey, even though I had this intentions, this is what life gave me. And from there, you get out of that spacey atmosphere. The band brings in another change with, like, bringing back a motif from earlier in the song. And then the song just basically ends with, like, the kind of cold feeling of just moving on with your life. Like, yesterday I was walking my dog, and it was a little cold outside, and I was listening to this. I'm like, this is actually a very appropriate soundtrack to, like, at least the weather that's outside. So,
well, you talk about relatability.
Yeah.
This is one of the rare songs, the next song we're going to talk about here, which is Science Fair, which, in a lot of senses, does feel like super relatable, and also one of the few ones where I can say that the lyrics stand out so much more than the music. Not that the music's bad, but a lot of times, especially on albums as artful, because I will say, like, at the start of the album, because towards the end of every show, we like to give albums we'd like to recommend based on what we've heard. And the vibes I was kind of getting to start with was a little on the side of maybe like a King Crimson, like their early stuff, like In the Court of the Crimson King. But this is where that notion goes away. Because while a lot of early prog rock and art rock was very, I don't want to say confused, but very, this is where I want to use, indiscreet as far as what their lyrics are. Like, they would say artful lyrics without really a whole lot of context behind them. Like you were talking earlier about how horns existed just for the sake of having horns. A lot of early art rock lyrics had sort of this imagery just for the sake of having imagery. And it didn't really present itself as anything other than, hey, we've never talked about this in a rock song before. Aren't we wacky? But this song...
Yeah.
Deals so fantastically with the frustration of trying to grow up mixed with the fear of trying to, because like you said, the last song ended with the concept of moving on with your life. In this song, it feels like the lead singer, the protagonist, is scared of that. Very scared.
Yeah. Very scared. Yeah, like, in terms of, like, narratively and, like, in my head, how the story's going, this is the lead singer going to, like, looking back, but, like, engaging with his current life. Like, one of the very first sets of lyrics that I absolutely love, and I absolutely agree with you, like, this album does get progressively better in terms of, like, lyricism and, like, at least storytelling. Like, the very first set of lyrics that I really love off of Science Fair is, I met her accidentally. It was at the Cambridge Science Fair, and she was so impressed I could make so many things catch on fire, but I was just covered in bubbles of methane gas, and you ended up burning.
Yeah. And again, like, even those last couple lines about the methane gas, in a sense, it gets a little out there. It's not as plain as like a Neil Young lyric or something like that, but at the same time, you know what he means. You know what he's trying to convey, or at least a feeling of what he's trying to convey. And then the lyrics about how, tomorrow I'm going to make things right and, do what I need to do. And then he contrasts that with currently staying at home with my mother still. And I'm thinking, okay, this man is tortured and he is not letting back anything.
And this song does culminate in the fact, and like, before I even skip to, like, the climax of this song, like, the instrumentation, like, again, fantastic. Like, this song does begin with, like, drums and bass doing a nice little groove there, and then guitars come crashing in with some very nice distortion. Like, it's very, guitars, toast crunch, in my opinion. And then you get it clears up so Isaac Wood can do his vocal delivery. And then after the first verse, there is, chaos again, and then we get nice guitar strumming. And even after the first verse, there's a nice duet between the crunchy guitars and the horns. And going into the next part that I really, really love, dude, there's a menacing synth lead, and the menacing synth lead it almost signals to the listener, hey, this is almost like a darker kind of tone.
Yeah, and it does a fantastic job of that. And I want to go back to a thing you said about there being a duet with the guitars and the vocals. One thing that we talked about, I believe it was on I want to say the Zeppelin episode that we talked about this, the idea of call and response, that in a sense, there's a lot of call and response on this, really throughout the entire album, but on this track and the previous track especially, because you talk about how the last song dealt with romanticism and how there's a lot of lush strings and working with synths, and there's a lot of smooth motifs in there. That, I think, is Isaac Wood. I said his name right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. That's Isaac Wood trying to paint his words through music. He's trying to sort of make the words that he just said turn into a musical version of that. And in this particular case, this is like a calm response between the words that are in his head and the feelings that he has in his heart. And the dissonance is the feeling he has in his heart, to the point where when they're singing in unison, it feels like he's on the edge and you're right there at the edge with him because you know exactly how he feels.
Yeah. And that's absolutely fantastic, man, because like the one thing that I'm slowly starting to realize that, and again, like, we'll talk about where the band has gone from here, but this band specifically, it is basically a reflection of, like, Isaac Wood's, like, mental state and everything that he's going through. And while his vocals and his words are one thing, like, the music around him is probably just the emotion that he's really feeling. And that's a fantastic way to put it, my dude. So the song ends, and the lyrics that I was really saying, like, that is another juicy nugget for myself personally. It goes, "I swear to God, you looked right at me and let a silk red ribbon fall between your hands. But as I slowly sobered, I felt the rubbing of shoulders, I smelled the sweat and the children crying, and I was just one among crowded stands." So, it's essentially the lead singer basically talking about, like, he sees this one person at, like, the Circus du Soleil, and he thinks, like, oh, this one person made a connection with me. But then he slowly starts to realize, oh, I'm just one person in this crowd. And with the previous instrumentation talking about, like, that menacing kind of synth stuff and the mental state of, like, the narrator so far, this culminates into, like, the song essentially crashing in with yelps and screams from Mr. Wood saying, "It's black country out there." And oh my goodness, like, perfection in my opinion.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. He paints that picture beautifully, and you talk about, because I thought about that line too, and what that does is paint this picture of how there's this world he wants to escape to with this woman that he sees, and the contrast of the reality that he's in, that she's in another world entirely than him, even though they're in the same room and they're so close to one another, so he feels. And in this particular case, reality does come, like you say, crashing back. Now, I will end my analysis of Science Fair, a very, very, very good song, by saying this. And this is not a criticism, this is a warning. As we had said earlier, the best way to listen to this song is as part of the album. So listen to the whole album. I made the mistake today of listening to the song in and of itself in the wild. And I will say that, again, for what it presents, it's a very good song. But you cannot... It's not a song, at least for... And I am speaking to those who might be just, like, trying to listen to new music, and they may be coming from the same background I am, of sort of more listening to conventional pop or conventional country or conventional anything. This song is not conventional tone-wise. The song is not conventional lyric-wise. And if you're looking to listen to something to just, this is not a song that you drive down the road and just sort of bop with. This is a song you have to listen to in order to appreciate it. And it may not put a smile on your face, but it may make you at least think. So that's all I'm going to say about that.
So, going on to side 2 of the album, and side B, because I actually, big surprise, I own this album on vinyl. I actually own every single Black Country New Road record on vinyl.
Oh, what, 2 of them?
There's actually, there's a live album that came out too.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I'll talk about that at the very end, but like, the record store that I go to, Attic Records, down in Millville, like, it's actually kind of cool that both versions of the studio albums that I have on Black Country New Road, like, the owners of the shop are able to get like an inverse print of it. So it's actually kind of cool and unique. So anyways, moving on to Sunglasses. Now, this is the longest song on the album, and one might ask, like, why is this called Sunglasses? And the basic concept of this is the lead singer was trying to make a point of, like, hey, like, you feel a little bit more confident when you get sunglasses on. Like, just as basic as that. Like we're gonna dive into, like, so much about this song, but, like, this is why it's called Sunglasses.
Yeah, and it's not a original concept of, lyrically, the song that comes immediately to mind when it talks about that sort of facade is the tracks My Tears by Smokey Robinson, The Miracles, of, I may look all right, but deep down inside, I'm not. And that's basically what this song is. Specifically, I think this song talks about, I don't even think I know this song talks about some of the themes that are similar to the last song, except the audience is different. Because here he is contemplating whether or not he's still cool, or still hip, or, openly acknowledging the fact that he's getting older and starting to think older and a bit more conservatively, and he's not sure if he likes that. And the way he paints that portrait, again, lyrically, is phenomenal. It is phenomenal. Because, again, while some of the things he talks about aren't necessarily, relatable to everybody, because spoiler alert, this band is British, and he talks about British engineering, so if you're not into that, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But, again, the things he feels and the way it's presented, as far as him talking about feeling safer behind his sunglasses, and the fact he has to say it out loud is already proof that he's losing that war, or at the very least he's battling that war internally. The fact that he has to put up this facade of, no, I'm fine, what's wrong with you? Where in reality it's mostly what's wrong with him.
Yeah. One lyric I want to call out to even add to your point, dude. The bridge, there's a constant lyric that is, said throughout the whole song. I'm so ignorant now with all that I've learned. And that's basically Mr. Wood just being like, after all that I've learned nothing. And, I'm just so hopeless. But, hey, I'm going to put on my sunglasses and try to act with a facade of, hey, everything's going to be good. I'm going to imagine, what my life can be like. But, taking a little bit step back to talk about, the instrumentation, because, again, I can gush, and Matt can gush about, the vocal delivery and the lyricism, but that's half the appeal to this band. So, the song does open up with a crunchy guitar lick. I love how I've been using that so much, that word crunchy guitars, and a spacey atmosphere. And it actually makes you feel the previous track ends with Isaac Wood talking about, it's Black Country out there! It's Black Country out there! This makes you feel like you're actually going into Black Country. And so the guitars eventually lose their crunchiness, and it just starts a very sweet groove with the drums. And then after that introduction, the sax line comes in, shifting direction in the song. And the song does become more direct and introspective, which leads to the lyrical portion that you talked about, where he was talking about, like, his fear of growing up and, like, becoming a bitter old man and complaining about British engineering. And then from there, the song swells into a chaotic mess. And then the shift in direction comes where the narrator puts on his sunglasses.
Yeah. Because, again, I think we talk about how the facade and the fact that he has to announce the facade is already him struggling and, trying as hard as he can to look cool and look confident when he's just shaking inside. And you talk about the music. I'm trying to think, it was probably about halfway through the song, the tone changes from the crunchy guitar to a very almost jangly guitar riff that is very, very reminiscent of Marquee Moon by Television. And my thought was, I wonder if this guy has listened to Marquee Moon by Television. And a few bars into the second half, I don't know why I said bars, but sure, let's go with it. He makes a reference to his children or the kids he knows dressing up like Richard Hell. And I'm thinking, okay, that answers my question. He definitely has listened to this song and or the album. Because Richard Hell was a member of the Voidoids. He was the leader of the Voidoids around the same time of the punk movement, and Television was a big part of that, and the riff sounds a lot like it. And so I'm thinking, perhaps the consistent feeling of, what he likes and what he thinks is cool being usurped by what everybody else thinks is cool is part of the foundation that is crumbling within him. And I also think, talking about what he fears, he doesn't want to be, excuse me, he doesn't want to be part of something. He wants to be his own thing. And I think the outro to the song, which features, I think, the first chorus on the entire record, is very reminiscent of that. Because he looks at the generation below him, he looks at the generation that preceded him, and he says, please keep all of that away from me.
And for those who listened to our previous episode and how we concluded the episode by talking about leaving Kanye out of it, this is the slight little juicy nugget that my wife so basically told me, like, hey, no one's gonna get that reference, man. But yeah, what were you about to say, dude?
I was gonna say that, I respect the fact that he used Kanye, because while I don't mistake Black Country New Road as being any sort of commercial band or presenting anything that resembles commerciality because they just want to make their own music, and Isaac Wood just wants to present his own vision, he could have used any artist there. He could have said Taylor or Drake or anything. But the fact that he went with Kanye is probably the closest this band has gotten to this point so far as to any sort of promotional outreach. Because someone's going to be like, oh, Kanye, they mentioned your name. And he's going to be like, what? And it's like, listen to this, man. It's like, what? So I don't know if that's what they intended, but that's what I'm going to go with as an interpretation, because it's a great line that, might get attention just on its sheer decision making.
The only research I was able to gather and find out about that specific lyric was basically Isaac showing his love for Kanye West, because apparently he really loves the honesty of how Kanye presents himself as a human being. Like, his bipolar nature, he doesn't hide anything. Like, he's fairly open. And even you think about this album as a whole and this group as a whole up until the end of the second album, that's everything that this group is, and that's everything that Isaac Wood is. Like, he's very open. And even to a certain extent, not in terms of, like, character-wise, but, like, I wouldn't consider him bipolar in terms of, like, his lyricism.
No, I wouldn't call it bipolar either. I think it's a very focused ideology, but it's weird. It's a focused confusion, if you will. Or I would even say self-loathing is in there. Because he definitely, you mentioned the fact he drops Kanye's name. He also drops the name of Black Midi throughout this record. He drops the names of a lot of bands he likes. And part of that, I think, plays into his psyche of, the things I love, but will I love them forever? I think it was the Beach Boys that said, will I love the same things I did when I was a kid and when I grew up to be a man? And this whole album seems to be that in a very dissonant, dark, and artsy way. And I do not mean any of those as knocks.
So, I feel like is there anything else we want to add upon Sunglasses? Because I think we hit it pretty out of the park.
Yeah, I think we did too. And all I would say is, title drop. Hey, listen to this. It's a good song.
So, the next track is called Track X. And in terms of, like, outliers from the rest of the album, like, this is... So, I'm very curious to hear what you got to say about this song, because it's not as much as a sore thumb as the Talking Heads, like, Green Thumb Swamp that that you love so much, and speaking in tongues. But
it's not as sore thumb as that. At least I don't think it is. It does stick out, I will say. It definitely is a stylistic outlier, but I don't think it's that much of a stylistic outlier. I think there's a lot of parallels in this song to the lush romanticism of Athens, France. But it's so lush that there's really not too much dissonance on this track. And I kind of wonder if it's hard for me to say that this is a pure vision of escapism by Isaac Wood, where he just has these feelings of, memories he used to have, because he contrasts that lyrically in, I guess, what would be the song's hook, with sort of a resonance of, okay, well, I guess that was fun, but that's over now. So, again, stylistically, it's the lushest and most, I guess, for, again, anyone who's in the conventional side of music or the conventional side of popular music, probably the most accessible song on the record, but I don't hate it.
The way that you talk about, escapism, it does take a very dark turn based on, like, how I was able to read into the song. So this song is basically about, again, trigger warning before I go any further with my discussion on this. I'm going to be talking about suicide. And if you are somebody who is feeling, like, depressed and hopeless and, life is not worth living, the best thing you can do is reach out to somebody. Like, even if it's just a friend, a family member, somebody that you haven't talked to in a while. We've all, have that one person who, even in the background of our brain, we have that anxiety, I haven't talked to so-and-so forever. Pick up the phone, call them, let them know, hey, this is what's going on, and, they will care for you. And, of course, it goes without saying, there's countless amount of, resources that you can call into. But, anyways, getting back into the song here. So, the song begins with a nice guitar groove and, the bare vocals, and the first verse is the narrator just doing everything he can to keep, the relationship going, but nothing is working. Again, more talk about, romantic love. And then the next part kind of opens up a little bit more, and there's nice vocals on the bridge with, the oohs and everything like that. And then, like, the song just keeps opening up to be warmer and warmer, which kind of gives, like, you know, again, the way that I read into it, like, the song ends with the narrator thinking about committing suicide, but at the last second, he thinks about the people who matter to him and decides to live for them.
Which is a good message. And I gotta say that I did not realize that song was about that subject. But it does play into something I've heard before, that a lot of times whenever someone is reaching that mentality, that they almost have this sort of serene comfort, realizing, you know, where they're at. But again, like you say, at the end, they decide, no, life is worth living, we must live on. And again, I kind of wonder, too, talking about the self-loathing and the sense of dissonance in this record, that I almost wonder if he purposefully, and I don't see why he wouldn't have, but purposely made the darkest subject matter on the entire record and give it the most accessible music packing. Yeah, I mean it's twisted. It's certainly twisted, and I don't recommend everybody try that. But in this case, it provides for a very it's a very turn of the moment type of part of the story, without really having the overblown dramatics that tend to come with that kind of peak exposition in any story.
Yeah. So, ready to talk about the last song, Opus?
Yes.
Also, I love how, like, at least going into, like, this episode, I was thinking, like, oh, there's only 6 songs. We're not going to hit the hour mark. Lo and behold.
Sure enough.
Yeah.
Sure enough.
An hour later. It all depends on how you edit this down, but we're definitely gonna at least hit over that hour mark. But, like, this song begins with cascading sax lines that crash into the band, and, like, you know, the band's jumping into another guitar and drum groove. So, essentially, what we basically heard throughout this whole album. Like, you know, chaos and grooves, and I'm here absolutely for all of it.
I am too. That was my biggest takeaway from this, and I would say that stylistically, or at least appreciatively, I like this song for the exact opposite reasons I liked Science Fair. Because with Science Fair, the lyrics and the emotion stood out more. I didn't really get the same level of lyrical, not that it was bad or anything, it was still a very good performance, but the lyrics didn't stand out to me as much as the music. And that's because the music on this track is elite. It is top tier. I talked earlier about how instrumental should be performed by marching bands. This song should be performed by any group of, like, high-end musicians with a horn section. Because the horn runs and the string runs on this song, particularly in the middle of the track, are beautiful. They are beautiful. It is, you know, the runs that only someone with top tier skill and focus and precision can perform. And I love the instrumental runs on this track. And I do love how it contrasts with almost this, you know, because I mentioned the vocals not standing out as much. The lyrics don't stand out as much. The vocals do. Because the contrast of those moments where the instruments run over the place is the contrast of almost this lush, almost Sinatra-esque ballad that Isaac Wood is presenting. And it creates for a very disjointed track. Maybe this is the last... Maybe what he was trying to present was this last attempt at an escape before realizing, okay, enough's enough. This is what we're going with. Because the contrast between the two parts of this song, the two moods, the two styles, is probably more so than any other part of the record.
Yeah. And, I mean, you hit everything out of the park, man. And the only lyrics that I want to mention are like, it goes in, like, it starts with the second verse, and the lyrics are, what we built to keep ourselves warm, burnt our hands, and charmed the locals. All those mistakes laid out plainly. And, I mean, the way that I read into that set of lyrics is everything that we've done to, like, sustain ourselves, it ended up hurting us, but people, like, on the outside were entertained by it. And every mistake that you made was just, everyone was able to see. So, like, again, a pretty grim outlook on life. So, and talk about, like, people call, like, Fall Out Boy and, like, Panic at the Disco, like, emo music. Like, this is some emo lyricism right there, man.
You would even possibly call it emotional.
Yeah.
No, but seriously, you're right. I do like that line a lot, and it definitely does paint a portrait of, at the very least, the downside of a romance gone wrong, and at the very most, like you said, possibly the idea of trying to please everybody going wrong.
Yeah.
But again, it didn't stand out to me. I was just so like mesmerized by the instrumentation. Like I was listening to. It's funny. I was listening on my walk today to an album called Crash by the Dave Matthews Band. And the vibes, at least the setup is similar, but the vibes are a complete 180. Dave Matthews is sort of mumbling his lyrics with that pitch that he usually does. And the band is phenomenal, but at the same time, it's very repetitive. Nothing's repetitive on this track. Nothing's repetitive on this record. And the horns, again, I just,
chef's kiss, like, top marks, man.
Yes.
So, and the only other thing that I'm just gonna add about this, and, like, this will, like, encapsulate, because, like, yes, I'm probably talking about the lyrics a little bit more than Matt at this point, but, like, Matt's doing an excellent job talking about, like, how the instrumentation is just top notch. With this particular track. But the outro, again, goes with that dark focus, and like, the lyric goes, everyone's coming up, I guess I'm a little late to the party. And the song just builds and builds and builds, and you really get the sensation of the intense anxiety that the narrator has. And after the vocals cut off, the horn plays the opening motif line of what we built from Black Country, and that's basically it. The record kind of just cuts it off.
Yeah, it does add that level of mystery to it that makes you wonder, what exactly does he mean by bringing that up again? And if there's anything about art that we all know, is that a lot of it can very well simply be left to interpretation, and that's the meaning of it. So, a nice stylistic way to end this immensely artsy record.
Now, before we give the overall rating and the next album recommendation, I want to talk about, like, because I hinted at the fact several times throughout this, like, there was a specific event that happened with the lead singer. So, on January 31st of 2022, this is, like, maybe a week before Ants From Up There released, the lead vocalist and guitarist Isaac Wood announced that he was leaving the band. And, like, I remember specifically reading about this, and, like, Isaac's reason for leaving is he was just genuinely emotionally defeated, and he was so sad. And we talk about, like, the darkness and, like, the emotional state of this. Like, he really poured his heart into this record and the other record that came out, Ants From Up There. And I can't remember specifically, but, like, I know, like, there was a point, I think it was in the opening track, Athens, France, where he talks about being afraid about being up there performing songs night after night, where he's exposing himself and, like, fearing like, hey, like people are gonna find out like what's happened in my life. And I mean, I give him all kudos for like having the like motion of fortitude, and even like kudos like as much as I would love to hear more from this iteration of the band, like I give him all respect for putting his mental health first and stepping away before like something tragic could have happened.
Agreed, and you can also make the argument too. I mean, I know the mental health and the emotional part is certainly the most important part of that, but it made me think of a quote I once read, surprisingly enough, from Yoko Ono, where she talked about how the Beatles broke up and how basically what they decided to do, or her vision of what they decided to do, is instead of sort of whimpering out in a state of, anger and frustration and, projects that wouldn't be as good as what they had already put out, they slayed the golden calf while they were on top. So, they and obviously not every band has to do that, and it's created various degrees of success, because some bands can go on forever and be good. Others can just, sort of fizzle out and just become parodies of themselves. But in this case, if this is what he left behind and this is all he ever recorded, certainly nothing wrong with that. And, best of luck and goodwill to him.
Yeah. And I will make a note that the rest of the members of the band are carrying on the band name, and like the different members of the group are sharing vocal duties. And for those of you who were kind of curious what that actually does sound like, check out their live album, because it has all original songs, and it is such a stylistic change. It really still focuses on the compositional elements and the musicianship of the group as a whole, but in terms of like the darkness and like the crunchy guitars, it's not there in that live album. But overall, based on like you at this point, Jens probably could guess what I'm gonna rate this album.
Yeah,
it is a beefy 10 out of 10. And I do recognize 10 out of 10, this album is not for everyone. But there are certain albums in my life where I have to listen to it as a whole entire piece, and I consider it its own musical thing. And I don't really break apart, like, hey, this is track X. Hey, this is Science Fair. Hey, this is Athens, France. I consider this whole album just one piece called For the First Time by Black Country New Road. So there's not much else reasons why I don't even have to justify giving this a perfect 10 out of 10. But that being said, I'm curious to see what you're going to rate this, because this is a different thing for you. Well, not a different thing, but like, this is a new experience for you checking out a group of this ilk, because I'll be honest with you, there's not too many groups out here like that.
Oh, absolutely not. No. I will say that you have done a decent job through our conversation of possibly convincing me that this is a 10 out of 10. I'm not going to go that far, only because there are a couple moments on this album that whether it be personally, I think, Athens, France is a good, not great song. And I think you could possibly put, even song X or track X in that same category. Again, none of these songs are bad, and the album as a whole is fantastic. I would probably give it a 9. A 9 out of 10.
Okay. Fantastic, man. I will, I'm glad that you enjoyed it, man.
Yeah. I very much enjoyed it. Again, I would probably say that the best way to listen to this album, like you said, is front to back as a whole. If you take anything away from it as far as like, You know, I mean, I know I'm going to contradict myself by saying this, but as far as recommended tracks, I would say at the very minimum, Sunglasses and Opus, just without question.
I would say recommended tracks for me. Again, Sunglasses, Opus, and yeah. I was
Maybe Science. You had a lot of good things to say about Science Fair. I'll say that.
Yeah. So, like, again, check out this album front to back. So, in terms of the next album recommendations from here, so I'm gonna give it a two-parter here, and it's for a very specific reason, because for those of you who actually have never heard of Black Country New Road before me and Matt talked about them in this episode, and you are like, you check it out, you check out this album, you're like, heck yeah, man, I love this album. The next album, Ants from Up There, it's a bit of a challenging record because the grooves and the crunchiness of the guitars are basically gone. And I remember when the album came out for me, and I was just like, oh my goodness, I don't know if I like this. But then the more and the more and the more I kept listening to it, I was just like, man, this is like a really, really, like, this is, there's so many layers to that album that it's almost like, you know, the only thing I want to equate it to is like, you know, a nice aged bottle of wine. Like, you know, you can just really appreciate it and just really dig into it. Now, for those of you who are like, oh, well, maybe I want to try something completely different, check out their live album. Because it does show off their musical capabilities outside that traditional, like, you know, like what this album did present. So, yeah, either way, check out, like, I would check out their live album first, and then go back to Ants from Up There, because I feel like that's going to prepare you for that album as a whole.
Well, as far as the album I would recommend, I mean, I would probably second what you say, but I'm not going to copy you. So I would say, and I sort of already hinted at it a little earlier, that anyone who appreciates the groove of this record and the feelings of, you know, dark lyrics with, you know, crunchy guitar and guitar that's kind of all over the place, it'd be Marquee Moon. I would say Marquee Moon is probably the way to go, because again, the riff is similar on the title track as it is to Sunglasses, and the vast styles, it comes from the same feeling of, you know, artsiness and introspection that I think I will say that the introspection and delivery of Isaac Wood on this album is more than Tom Verlaine on Television, but as far as similarities and things to check out, that's where I would go. And the crunchiness isn't quite there, the dissonance isn't there, but the guitars are, the lyrics are, and the I guess there's a little bit of dissonance and a little bit of darkness to it that's there. So that's what I would suggest.
Cool. So, any idea what the next episode's going to be for our show, man? Because it is your turn to pick this, because the Black Country New Road was my baby, and it's okay if you don't have a idea yet. I mean, we can keep the listeners in suspense.
Then that's what we will do, because I have a few ideas in that regard, but I will come up to a conclusion. And for those of you following us week by week, first of all, we appreciate that, and we appreciate any exposure that you have given us at this point, and any word of mouth or social media that you give us at this point. But secondly, you're just going to have to wait, because I'm not going to tell you what it is, because I'm not even telling myself what it is, because I don't know what it is yet.
So, again, excellent episode. I love this album. So, wrapping everything up here, again, thanks again for listening to this episode of Hey Listen to This. If you loved what you heard, the best way that you can help the show grow is rate the show on your podcasting platform of choice. A 5-star review does help us show up in the algorithms a little bit more. And if you're curious to see, like, you know, advertisements for next episodes when they're going to drop, one, you can follow us and subscribe on your platform of choice. But also check out all the social medias. We are at, like, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I refuse to call it X. At TT Hey Listen. And if you have an idea for a future episode, feel free to hit us up on our email. That is ttheylisten@gmail.com. And yeah, that's all I got. That's all the things I had to plug. So for the first time for this episode about the first time of Black Country New Road, my name is Ryan Kearns.
My name is Matt Durzik.
And
let's go Pens.